News of Saladin's victory and capture of Jerusalem spread quickly through Europe, carried by messengers who spoke of Christian knights scattered, their banners trampled beneath the hooves of Saladin's army. For Christendom, the loss was devastating. Jerusalem, the holiest of cities, was now under Muslim control. Soon after, Pope Gregory VIII called for a new crusade to reclaim the city. Across Europe, kings and warriors vowed to take the cross and fight for the Holy Land. Among them, 3 great rulers took up the challenge: Richard the Lionheart of England, Philip II of France, and Frederick Barbarossa, the Holy Roman Emperor. Frederick was the first of the 3 kings to set out for the Holy Land and began the journey on the 11th of May, 1189, with an army of some 18,000 men, including 3,000 knights. After leaving Germany, Frederick's army was increased by the addition of a contingent of 2,000 men, led by the Hungarian Prince Géza, the younger brother of King Béla III of Hungary. As the Crusaders made their way toward the Byzantine border, the landscape began to change. The rolling plains of Central Europe gave way to the steep hills and dense forests of the Balkans. The army moved cautiously, for while the land was beautiful, it was also full of dangers: hostile tribes, treacherous passes, and unpredictable weather. When they reached the Byzantine frontier, however, they found their first real obstacle: the Byzantines themselves. Though they had been promised safe passage through Byzantine territory, the Crusaders quickly realized that their welcome would not be as warm as they had hoped. Byzantine Emperor Isaac II had secretly entered into negotiations with Saladin, offering to delay the Crusaders in exchange for the protection of his own empire. The situation would soon escalate when small Byzantine forces began skirmishing with the Crusader army. On the 24th of August, the Crusader army reached Philippopolis and the Byzantine forces fled at their approach. That same day, a Byzantine envoy arrived with a letter from Isaac, who referred to Frederick as King of Germany, refusing to call him emperor, and accused him of plotting to put his son Frederick on the throne of Constantinople. 2 days later, the Crusaders seized Philippopolis and its plentiful supplies, and thereafter the Crusaders resorted to plunder and a scorched earth policy. Over the next few weeks, the Crusaders took various towns and villages. This forced the Byzantines to take action. With some 2,000 horsemen, the Byzantines set up an ambush. The Crusaders were soon informed of this plan by local Armenian residents, and they set out with 5,000 cavalry to intercept the Byzantine forces. The two forces would eventually meet, and a bloody battle ensued. In the ensuing battle, the Byzantines were routed. The Crusaders then threatened to attack Constantinople, forcing the Byzantine emperor to grant the Crusaders safe passage into Asia. The Crusaders were also promised safe passage through the region by the Turkish Sultanate of Rum, but instead were faced with constant hit-and-run attacks. A few days later, a Turkish army of 10,000 men was defeated at the Battle of Philomaelion by 2,000 Crusaders. After continued Turkish raids, the Crusaders decided to replenish their stock of animals and foodstuffs by conquering the Turkish capital of Iconium. On the 18th of May, 1190, the Crusaders defeated the Turks at the Battle of Iconium, sacking the city and killing 3,000 Turkish troops. Frederick was now far more confident and set off again on his journey. While crossing the Salith River, Frederick's horse slipped, throwing him against the rocks. He then drowned in the river. After this, much of his army returned to Germany. The rest of the army made their way to Antioch. While the imperial army did not achieve its objective of capturing Jerusalem, it did capture the capital of the Seljuk Sultanate and inflicted considerable damage on Turkish forces. King Richard led an army of around 15,000 men. This number included infantry, archers, and 2,000 knights and mounted soldiers. Richard's army was significantly bolstered by mercenaries and contingents from his territories in Normandy, Aquitaine, and Anjou. Philip II's army was slightly smaller than Richard's, estimated at around 10,000 men, including infantry, archers, and 1,500 knights and mounted soldiers. Philip left Sicily directly for the Middle East on the 30th of March, 1191. Richard and his force set off 2 weeks later. Shortly after setting sail from Sicily, Richard's armada of 180 ships and 39 galleys was struck by a violent storm. Richard eventually landed in Cyprus, which at the time was Byzantine territory. The Byzantine Emperor Isaac violated his oath of hospitality by ordering Richard to leave Cyprus, which provoked Richard to seize control of the island. Despite this conquest, Richard's primary focus remained on the Holy Land, and he departed from Cyprus a few months later to continue his campaign. During the Battle of Hattin in 1187, King Guy of Jerusalem was captured, but was released a year later by Saladin. Guy aimed to regain his reputation and authority after his disastrous defeat at Hattin and set his eyes on Acre. Acre was an important strategic position, meaning control of the city was crucial for launching future campaigns into the Middle East. Guy led a modest crusader army, around 7,000 men, including 400 knights, to lay siege to the city. The siege began on the 28th of August, 1189, with Guy's forces encircling the city, hoping to force a surrender from the Muslim garrison. However, Saladin had stationed a well-prepared defense within Acre, with an estimated 6,000 men under the command of experienced military leaders. The initial phase of the siege was brutal and disorganized, characterized by disease, hunger, and frequent skirmishes. Saladin, keen to relieve Acre, quickly mobilized his armies and launched counterattacks from outside the city. Both sides engaged in fierce skirmishes, but neither was able to gain a decisive advantage in the early months of the siege. As news of the siege spread, European leaders and nobles began preparing to join the Crusader cause. The first significant reinforcements arrived in early 1190. The armies of Leopold V, Duke of Austria, and contingents from France and England came to help the Crusaders. In the spring of 1191, more significant reinforcements arrived for the Crusaders. Both the armies of Richard the Lionheart and Philip II of France arrived in a short period of time. These monarchs brought with them fresh troops, advanced siege engines, and renewed hope for victory. The Crusader force now consisted of 20,000 men, and Richard, known for his military prowess and charisma, quickly took command of the Crusader forces and launched a series of aggressive assaults on Acre's walls. Richard's naval fleet helped maintain the blockade, cutting off Acre's access to supplies from the sea. By July 1191, Acre's defenders were exhausted, cut off from resupply, and overwhelmed by continuous Crusader attacks. On the 12th of July 1191, after nearly 2 years of brutal fighting, the Muslim defenders of Acre were forced to surrender. The terms of the surrender were negotiated by Saladin and Richard the Lionheart. The terms of surrender promised the release of prisoners, the payment of a large ransom, and the return of the True Cross, a Christian relic that had been captured by Saladin at the Battle of Hattin. Following the capture of Acre, Richard was aware that he needed to capture the port of Jaffa before making an attempt on Jerusalem. With a large Egyptian fleet that had been captured at Acre, Richard began to march down the coast from Acre towards Jaffa in August 1191. Saladin, whose main objective was to prevent the recapture of Jerusalem, mobilized his army to attempt to stop the Crusaders' advance. Richard knew that his army's greatest need was water and that heat exhaustion was its greatest danger. Although pressed for time, he proceeded at a relatively slow pace. He marched his army only in the morning before the heat of the day. The fleet sailed down the coast in close support, a source of supplies and a refuge for the wounded. Aware of the ever-present danger of enemy raiders and the possibility of hit-and-run attacks, he kept the column in tight formation. Saladin's horse archers continuously harassed the Crusaders. Though provoked and tormented by the skirmish tactics, Richard's leadership ensured that order and discipline were maintained under the most difficult of circumstances. From the 30th of August until the 7th of September, Saladin was waiting within striking distance, waiting for an opportunity to attack if the Crusaders exposed themselves. Saladin had realized that harassing the Frankish army with a limited portion of his troops was not going to stop its advance. To do this, he needed to commit his entire army to a serious attack. Saladin fielded likely between 20 and 30,000 men, the majority being mounted. Luckily for Saladin, the Crusaders had to cross one of the few forested areas in the region, the Wood of Arsuf. The woodland would mask the disposition of his army and allow a sudden attack to be launched. Saladin gave the order to launch a full assault and attack the Crusaders. Seeing Saladin's force emerging from the surrounding woodland, the Crusaders formed a defensive position with infantry in front and archers behind. The weight of the attack was switched to the rear of the Crusader column, with the Hospitallers coming under the greatest pressure. Richard was determined to hold his army together, forcing the enemy to exhaust themselves in repeated charges, with the intention of holding his knights for a concentrated counterattack at just the right moment. For the Crusaders, the Battle of Arsuf had now entered a critical stage. Richard knew that the charge of his knights needed to be reserved until the Ayyubid army was fully committed, closely engaged, and the Saracens' horses had begun to tire. One of Richard's household knights, Baldwin Le Caron, moved through the infantry and charged into the Saracen ranks with a cry of "Saint George!" He was then followed by the rest of the Hospitaller knights. Moved by this example, many other French knights also charged. Saladin's army suffered great numbers of casualties, the knights taking bloody revenge for all they had had to endure earlier in the battle. Arsuf was an important victory. The Muslim army was not destroyed despite losing 7,000 men, but it did rout. By depriving Saladin of the coast, Richard seriously threatened his hold on Jerusalem. Following the battle, Richard was able to take, defend, and hold Jaffa, a strategically crucial move towards securing Jerusalem. In November 1191, the Crusader army advanced inland towards Jerusalem. On the 12th of December, Saladin was forced by pressure from his emirs to disband the greater part of his army. Learning this, Richard pushed his army forward. As the Crusaders got closer to Jerusalem, they were faced with appallingly bad weather, heavy rain, and hailstorms. This, combined with the fear that if the Crusader army besieged Jerusalem, it might be trapped by a relieving force, led to the decision to retreat back to the coast. The Crusader army made another advance on Jerusalem, and in June it came within sight of the city before being forced to retreat again, this time because of dissension amongst its leaders. After Saladin was defeated again while attempting to retake Jaffa, he was forced to finalize a treaty with Richard. Providing that Jerusalem would remain under Muslim control, Saladin allowed unarmed Christian pilgrims and traders to visit the city. The Third Crusade did not achieve the goal of recapturing Jerusalem. However, it facilitated the continuation of the Crusader states that were on the brink of collapse. Christian and Muslim pilgrims could now safely conduct pilgrimages to Jerusalem together.